All right. Good evening, everybody out there. Thanks for being here this evening. This is another episode of Paranormal Planet Live, and I am your host, Jack Carey. This is the channel where we examine, delve into in a very deep and extensive way various paranormal events, phenomenon, and mysteries going on. In case there are some new people out there, got some really interesting things to discuss with you guys on this channel. Basically, what you're getting is the ongoing notes, if you will, of the forensic investigations that I perform and then write about. Some of you may be familiar with my books, Paranormal Planet and Bigfoot Unleashed, and I'm going to be talking about both of those this evening because some interesting things have recently developed. Apologize for dry throat this evening. So we've got our ongoing crypto investigation. I've discussed some of the techniques that we'll be employing. Of course, not all of them, and that's sort of the way it has to be. There's a lot of backstabbing, skullduggery, if you will, in the Bigfoot community. And so you kind of have to be quiet about some of the techniques that you use, etc. And so this brings me up to something very interesting. I'm sure a lot of you have been following the show Bigfoot Expedition Bigfoot on the Travel Channel. It, by all accounts, and I know somebody behind the scenes there, it's a credible program. The guy is, a real tracker, and I know a very accomplished and well-known cryptozoologist who's worked with that gentleman. So, and that gentleman's actually using some of the equipment designed by this cryptozoologist on the show, although they haven't shown the equipment, but it's impressive. So that brings me up to discussing that on one of their last couple of episodes, they literally covered every point that I wrote about in my book, Bigfoot Unleashed. I was sitting there in astonishment because I wrote my book quite a while ago, and this was a brand new episode, and here they were discussing everything that I had written about in my book. Now, whether or not somebody associated with that show had read my book and then used some of that material, or whether or not they just happened to come across all of the exact same stuff. It just it caught me off guard, and I was very surprised to see it. What they discussed is everything that I discuss in my book and have for a long time now. The apparent ET connection to these creatures, the idea that they are genetic chimera, the idea that there are, portal areas, which is what I'll be discussing tonight, is alien portals. And you'll see how and why all of this sort of melts together into one big whole. And that is forensic paranormal investigation. I've had a lot of people asking me what that is. Well, forensic paranormal investigation or forensic investigation means that you're looking at all of the disciplines at once and trying to find the interconnections between them in a way that one can confirm the other. It's not easy. It's a difficult process. It requires the ingestion, if you will, of vast amounts of information, which has to be mined from the web out there. And it's not an easy process, but if you've seen any of the past episodes, you'll see a lot of, the puzzle pieces that have been able to be put together. So it really caught me off guard. They even talked about an ancient, if you will, Native American oral story, and it came from the Paiute Indians. The gentleman they had on the episode recounting this oral tale didn't seem to know which tribe it came from, which also bothered me. But they have a tale about a so-called false moon that descended from the sky and deposited what they called crazy bears into the wilderness. One of these crazy bears was actually, I guess, got ill, something of that nature, and the tribal people were taking care of it. A white pioneer settler guy was in that area, and he wrote in his personal diary about having gone. They showed him a hut, and they took him in, and there was this, a creature with a man's face covered in long dark hair from head to toe. And he clearly describes it. Well, that's in my book as well. So it's interesting that the primary show on Sasquatch has now pivoted and turned towards the alien phenomenon, if you will. And, I've had another well-known cryptozoologist sort of make a barbed comment at me one time, who said one should not invoke a mystery to help solve another mystery. Well, that's in fact what you have to do. Otherwise, you're never going to solve any of those mysteries, because they're all related and interconnected and integral to one another. So thanks everybody for being here. I see Gloria, and thanks Liam, and there's Angelo and Vikings. Thanks guys. Just saying hello to a lot of the regulars that show up. So anyway, I'll quit my complaining about Expedition Bigfoot, but if anybody has some kind of a connection there, I'll talk to my friend and say, hey man, talk to Russell, the tracker on their show, and be like, whether you guys know it or not, all of that information has already been published. You are in effect in copyright violation. That's what I would tell them. Anyway, if you haven't seen that episode, I would. If you have not read my book, please do so, Bigfoot Unleashed. And you'll see really the full body of evidence for where they're headed. And if they had just read my book, then they could have skipped everything on their series up until this last episode and could have saved everybody a lot of time. But such is the Bigfoot community. People seem to be completely unaware of other people's work. And so a lot of them tend to repeat the same discoveries and claim that they're the first, even though they weren't. Let's see here. My manuscript. Yes, I apologize. My new book, which I have changed the title of, will be coming out shortly. It has taken a lot of formatting changes. That's all I can kind of put it as, because when you convert it into the publisher's system, basically their templates, then it has to be all constructed in a certain way to be able to be accepted and and actually be able to print copies and have the ebook. So it's called Enoch's Key. This encompasses, if you will, 20 years of very intense research that I've kind of had pet project for a long time. And really, it is all of the information that led me to the idea, theory, and belief that in the south of France, there is in fact a lost tomb of one of the two Anunnaki princes mentioned in the Sumerian tablets. I think that there's ample evidence to show that mystery organizations, cults, if you will, occult masters, maybe, I don't know what else you would call these, the Priory of Sion, etc., knew of this secret, that it was encapsulated in some of these ancient mystery schools and is the answer to a lot of the secrets that they have. This leads into another mystery I was examining and investigating and writing articles for a magazine at the time known as Dagobert's Revenge. And so it's a fascinating story. I think you guys will really like it. The research is so extensive that pretty much throughout the entire manuscript, I quote the actual sources in their words, so everybody can actually look up the entire trail of evidence as I present it and come to their own conclusion. And so I'm proud of it. I think it'll be fantastic. I think people will really like it. So I was going to talk about Woo World News, but I don't want to go too far astray. So Woo World News, which is basically all of the open source intelligence sources that the Paranormal Intelligence Agency, which is my platform, has, that feed in and then get sorted through all of the information that's out there day by day dealing with any number of paranormal phenomenon shows up, and it's gone through from thousands of different news sources around the world. And so those are all collected and collated, and I'm going to start producing each Sunday just a short 15-minute Woo World News where we'll go through and I'll show you each article and we'll talk about the central point of each. And I think that will be a lot of fun, actually. UFO Witness, there's a program out there. This is the second season. It's called UFO Witness, has Ben Hansen, and this season has my prior producer at Gaia Productions. She was the producer of Ancient Civilizations, which had 10 million viewers. And I can assure you she's an extremely accomplished investigator and is quite intelligent. And she is now the other principal investigator. Her name is Melissa Tittle. So I would be paying attention to that show because I know her personally, and I can tell you that she'll be upsetting the apple cart, if you will. And a couple of their episodes they have are fascinating. They already have some interesting stuff. We have been discussing the hitchhiker effect ongoing, and we will continue to do so because the hitchhiker effect and the findings of the OSAP scientists have now in my mind, revolutionized paranormal investigation and research. And this is the new path that we're going down. And a witness that they had on their show figures into all of this, right? And this ties into our alien portal discussion this evening, in case you're wondering. So they had a witness on their show, and it was one of the sailors that was aboard the ship the night that the F 18 had its encounter with the Tic Tac UFO. The sailor didn't witness the incident, obviously, because it happened to the pilot, but he had a friend who knew the pilots and was able to view the video of the craft. It disturbed him a lot. And when he got out of the Navy, he began to have stuff happen to him, just like the hitchhiker effect. Now, in the OSAP findings, one of the side effects, if you will, of the hitchhiker effect was a full-blown alien abduction. Well, this gentleman reported that he woke up one night and there beside his bed was a female alien that had blue skin. He said that her skin felt thicker than a human's because he reached out to touch her to make sure she was real. And he didn't remember much after that. The investigators point to the fact that there are a number of UFO abductees, witnesses who report what is now known as the Blue Syrians. It's believed that they came from Sirius and that they're extremely advanced with their technology, etc. But I have to bring up how that ties into the Western African tribe, the Dogon, their interaction with the alien life form, obviously that came from Sirius. And that life form wasn't described as blue and, somewhat pretty to look at, etc. They describe these things as absolutely horrid to look at. That it scared the hell out of them to look at these things that they consider to be gods. It's the only time in human history that somebody's gods were depicted as being too horrible to even look at. In every other culture, they're described as being beautiful and shining, etc. And that's another, telltale that the Dogon were in fact telling the truth. So it cracks me up. But here you have a sailor who didn't have an actual encounter with the UFO or any kind of personal encounter. This is a guy who simply watched the video of the encounter the night that it occurred, and then later began to experience the hitchhiker effect in the form of these visitations from these aliens. That is bizarre. How can we explain that? I call it the paranormal virus. The OSAP guys talked about how when somebody from the program went home and they settled down in their house, a wide array of paranormal activity would begin to happen. And that is the hitchhiker effect. Then it would begin to happen to their neighbors' children, their neighbors' children's friends, and it spread out like a virus, getting weaker and weaker as it spread. That's just the facts of the case as they have stated it, the scientists of the OSAP program. Chief among them is Dr. Colm Kelleher. However, I guess now Dr. Travis Taylor, who is the principal scientist on the Skinwalker Ranch program, has come out in an article admitting he was the chief scientist of the Pentagon's UFO program, ATIP. And he goes on to say in that article that he's seen hundreds of these anomalous objects and that they don't know what they are. This I think proves my point that Skinwalker Ranch is in fact part of overall disclosure. I think now that makes it obvious, and it's something I've been talking about since the show came out. And you're seeing an ever expanding amount of disclosure. So it's not going to go away. I talked about how there's been sort of an internal battle in the Pentagon about disclosure. There's a group of people that, in one article, Elizondo calls them, basically it's a cult of people with a certain belief, or religious belief trying to obfuscate, basically mix up the facts for the Congress, the Senate, and make them believe that this could in fact be earthly technology when it's not. Well, it's hard to put a name and face to who those people would be. But recently, in the last few days, an article came out that you can Google or search engine, try to use another search engine except Google, to look up. It's called Sex, Lies, and UFOs. It talks about how there was a gentleman who was basically the guy in charge of the intelligence community, a guy who would have been in power to do what has been accused of having been done. He was recently discovered of having improper relations with some of the underlings, and so he has now been ousted. If you look a little deeper, or speculate a little deeper, perhaps a lot of that was initiated because of this quarrel going on in the Pentagon. If he was in fact the main player in trying to, keep it a secret, then he has now been removed. And it's an interesting article. It's out there. I encourage you to read it. Let's see what else I got here for you guys. Gone. And we'll start talking about, the alien portals. This is something where all of this coincides. So if you'll recall, Dr. Travis Taylor at Skinwalker Ranch, they were testing with rockets various signals that seem to be transmitting from the ranch upwards. At one point, they describe it as a communication-like signal. That's very interesting. And there's always been this sort of theory that Skinwalker Ranch could, in fact, or I guess it's now becoming more popular, a theory that Skinwalker Ranch could, in fact, be a portal to another dimension. In my book, Paranormal Planet, I discuss the unified field theory of paranormal activity. In it, I identify various places around the world where there are magnetic anomalies that should not be there. These magnetic anomalies are all places where there is a high concentration of quartz crystal. If you've read my theory, you'll know that there's many physicists who believe other dimensions exist and that there must be some sort of life on those dimensions, and some of it could be highly intelligent. And these areas have an effect that is called the Mach effect in science. I think what's happening is very much like the Mach effect, where a scientist has built this thruster, the Mach effect thruster, where it harnesses the movement of matter through space. So when matter actually travels through space, there's these tiny little minute fluctuations, and there's a way to harness those fluctuations as an energy and keep propelling it along, like a point, kind of like 0 point energy, right? Well, In these areas, what you have is the Earth, which is a body of mass. It's traveling through space. There are minute fluctuations. In these areas, there are high concentrations of quartz crystal deposits. Those deposits get squeezed in these minute fluctuations. When they do, when you compress, quartz crystal becomes ionized. And when it's ionized strongly enough, it can emit electromagnetic fields, which are strong enough to rip or tear, if you will, the membrane between this dimension and other dimensions. When this occurs, there is momentary interaction before the membrane sort of melts back together again. And we call that momentary interaction paranormal activity. In these areas, there is a wide array of paranormal activity that occurs in a relatively small geographic area. It was something that me and some other investigators really didn't quite understand. How is it possible that you can have a relatively small geographic area where all of the paranormal activity was happening pretty much at once? I mean, one day you get a Bigfoot report, the next day a UFO report, an abductee calls you, and they're all within like a 10-mile radius of one another, and you're just left shaking your head, going, "What happened?" But in that area. And this occurred to me in the San Luis Valley, south central Colorado, which is one of these areas. There are very high concentrations of quartz crystal. And this is an area that I did a lot of work in, and it's an area where nonstop paranormal activity occurs. And so what you're seeing there is these deposits becoming ionized when they're compressed through natural geologic processes. And it's enough to allow for perhaps other entities to come through those doorways. That's one possible scenario by which these portals work. It is interesting to note that the US government appears to be aware of this information. And I say that because near each one of these areas, not only do you find, well, some of them are in other countries, but you still at each one of them find a military presence. That's something else that stands out. And there are 7 areas around the planet that have unexplainable magnetic anomalies. Take Sedona, Arizona, for example. This is a place often called a portal, a vortex, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, if you will. And this is a place where there is nonstop UFO, alien, and paranormal activity. You can look at aeromagnetic maps of the area, and what you'll find is that the mountains of Sedona have a electromagnetic field which is around 500 times the strength of the surrounding countryside. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That kind of strength in a electromagnetic signal is strong enough to do what my theory says is happening. It is becoming apparent to me as I'm watching these investigations unfold at Skinwalker Ranch, UFO Witness, etc., even Expedition Bigfoot, that they're all converging on the idea of alien portals. And that's part of the reason I wanted to cover the topic. Now, as you watch those programs, you'll see that they're all kind of going in that direction. And, it occurred to me because I was listening to Travis Taylor talk, the, the scientist, and he was talking about the signal, and it could be a communication signal. Well, this could be some sort of device, could be something that allows for that doorway to be utilized at will. And it occurred to me that it's possible that at each one of these areas, there may in fact be ways of keeping the doors from opening, or if they're open, to in fact close those doors. We have to remember that this is electromagnetic fields, this is sound, vibration, this is frequency. And that leads us into a very interesting area of research that I've recently been undertaking. And we've discussed the crystal entity theory with you guys. My theory that it's possible that there is an entity living within these quartz crystal deposits that could be or could account for the hitchhiker effect. And that's all in past episodes fully explained. But this line of research, of investigation, has led me into an ancient civilization. It's led me into archaeological findings of various caves and chambers that were built with the right kind of acoustics to be able to generate the right kind of frequencies in order to open an interdimensional portal. Now, this was a very, very long time ago, stretches into our ancient past. And this was an area of Africa where, for thousands of years, there was a naturally occurring nuclear reaction, completely stable. It's an amazing scientific phenomenon. They didn't think it was even possible that that could take place, but it did. There's a uranium deposit. It burned at the right rate, etc. That it created this, nuclear reaction. And I find that interesting in conjunction with the chambers and the frequencies, because modern day UFO activity is largely based around our nuclear installations. So back then you have this nuclear connection. Now you have this nuclear connection. It was shortly after the testing of the first nuclear bombs that the Roswell crash happened, the Trinity crash happened. It is nuclear powered naval ships that are now constantly the target of these UAPs. And we've had quite a few nuclear bases that have had their nuclear missiles interfered with by UFOs hovering above the base. This is something that even Senator Harry Reid has openly talked about. So, but anyway, it's very, very interesting how these doorways may have been opened in the ancient past. And I propose an idea, a theory, because in paranormal science, you start with a theory and then see if there is any pieces of the evidence to help support that idea. And it's possible that perhaps in this ancient time, near this nuclear reaction, a doorway was opened and to a particular dimension, and an entity came through, which is much like what I'm describing as the crystal entity, right? But ends up interacting through this area of the Uinta Basin, which is where Skinwalker Ranch is, because of its perhaps how it's constructed geologically. Maybe this is an area where it can exhibit more power than it can anywhere else, etc. And that theory came to me because the hitchhiker effect, which encompasses this huge wide array of paranormal activity, including what appears to be like poltergeist type activity, at least one cryptid, in this case a dog man, it's all traced back to interaction of these OSAP scientists with the UFO phenomenon, all of it. And so you're left with these exotic theories, because if you can trace all of that paranormal activity back to this interaction with these UFOs, you have something very, very unexpected happening. And this is going to be, really the new path of investigation in the paranormal world. I'm going to check my notes here, guys. And speaking of portals, I've had people ask me about psychedelics, the use of psychedelics. We've talked about Terence McKenna before, and the idea that they're able to somehow communicate with or interact with entities on other dimensions. This is something now reported by people who have ingested ayahuasca, etc. The problem with that is that under scientific laboratory conditions, or as far as anybody knows, those interactions have never been duplicated. In other words, they've never been able to get in communication with the same entity ever again. And the entities always appear differently to each person. So it's not something that's repeatable. Therefore, something else is happening there that we don't quite understand. So I'm just reading a few of the comments out here. Yeah, so the nuclear connection is huge here, guys. So you can trace all of the modern day UFO activity to nuclear activity. So there is something key and fundamental in that. And the fact that this activity was occurring thousands of years ago in an area where people seem to have possessed an ancient knowledge of how to open these doorways is fascinating for a paranormal investigator. Leads us in all kinds of different directions. So this is kind of where the whole hitchhiker effect really kind of leads us. Is the entity, let's call it, able to mimic all of the other paranormal activity, including at least one cryptid animal, which is the dogman interaction twice to the chief CIA agent that occurred there, to his wife and to his children? Both had interactions with the dogman. This was attributed to the hitchhiker effect, so we now know that at least one cryptid animal is in fact included in this paranormal activity. The question is that I propose, if this in fact is an alien intelligence of some kind, is it mimicking the paranormal activity that we're seeing, or is it the ultimate source of all the paranormal activity we're seeing? It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. And almost right on cue this week, an article came out written by some astrobiologists, actually, and this is out there, and you can Google it, look it up. It talks about how their new theories are that the Earth may, in fact, be conscious. It may, in fact, have a sentient intelligence. And if that theory is true, then that could perhaps explain Terence McKenna's quote that I talk about a lot, in which he says that we live in a symbiotic relationship with something that disguises itself as an alien invasion so as not to alarm us. That's fascinating idea, because an alien invasion is pretty alarming. So imagine what could be more alarming than that, right? It's this weird symbiotic relationship. Is it a weird symbiotic relationship with an entity that came through thousands of years ago, and introduced all of this weird activity all around the world? Maybe before this, there wasn't that activity. Maybe the Earth wasn't a paranormal planet, as I call it. So it's leading me into lots of really interesting and fruitful areas of investigation. Like I said, I've not had the depth of time that I really want to kind of delve into digging up the exact details of how this could have occurred, simply because of the manuscript that I'm currently just about done with the formatting problems. And that's really all I have for you guys this evening. I can guarantee you that you're going to begin to hear more and more about the idea of interdimensional doorways, portals, wormholes, things of that nature, because it looks to me as though these scientists who are in the know are leaning in that direction. So instead of perhaps aliens coming from some far off distant planet, perhaps they originate in a completely different dimension and they can simply go through the doors. So that's all I have for you guys this evening. Like I said, as soon as this book is out, I'll have a in-depth investigative video for you guys dealing with an interesting topic that nobody's ever really talked about. The use of paranormal activity to acquire viable intelligence for military purposes. So, guys, I will see you then. Until then, just be careful out there. The world is getting crazier and crazier. If you've been following the show for a while, you'll know that a couple of months ago I mentioned this hyperinflation was going to occur, along with some other activities. So take a look at that as well. If you haven't seen the Yowie Central or listened to the Yowie Central interview, I encourage you to do so, because I explain why. The guys on Expedition Bigfoot, I don't talk about that on the show, really, just kind of mention it with my book, but this is something I had to get in here at the end. So on Expedition Bigfoot, they got a hair sample, Russell did, and it was in an area that there's just no way a human would have been in. And it's long and curly, you're right? You know, kind of has a curl to it. And so they send it off for DNA testing, and they talk about it, the results on the show, and it comes back human. Exactly as I said in my book it would, and any other DNA sample of a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And that's because they are, in fact, a half-human hybrid. So anyway, guys, I will see you next time. Until then, just be good, be safe, and be well.